The reception hall still smelled like lilies and overbrewed coffee when the attorney finished reading my grandfather's will. The room had settled into that polite, heavy silence people wear after a funeral, grief mixed with curiosity, everyone waiting to hear what was left and to whom. That's when my mother picked up the brown paper-wrapped book the attorney had just slid across the table, turned it once in her hands, and said, clearly, casually, publicly, "Get this junk out of my sight." Most of the big things had already been discussed in hushed family conversations long before that day. The brokerage account, the life insurance, the lake cabin that had been sold years ago. My mother sat upright in her black dress, fingers laced tightly over her purse, nodding at all the appropriate moments. When the attorney reached the final personal items, his voice softened. "To my granddaughter," he read, glancing at me over his glasses, "I leave my annotated chess collection, specifically the 1974 Dubrovnik tournament volume." There was a pause, a faint shuffle of chairs. My mother let out a small laugh that wasn't meant to be quiet. "A chess book," she said. "That's what he leaves her." The attorney simply nodded and slid the item across the long conference table. It was wrapped in brown paper. Old, rectangular, modest. My mother didn't wait for me to touch it. She picked it up first, turned it over like she was inspecting expired produce, and scoffed. "It's junk," she said. "He should have given it to the thrift store." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. No one corrected her. She pushed it toward me with 2 fingers. "Take it if you want," she added. "Or better yet, get this out of my sight." When we got home, she didn't even hand it to me. She dropped it straight into the kitchen trash can, right on top of paper plates from the reception. "There," she said, dusting off her hands. "Done." I stood there for a moment, looking at the edge of brown paper peeking out from beneath a plastic fork. I didn't argue. I didn't bend down. I didn't defend him. That was the moment I stopped arguing. I've learned something about being underestimated. When people decide you're small, they stop watching closely. Have you ever been handed something everyone else thought was worthless? If stories like this resonate with you, take a second to subscribe, like the video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read more of them than you think. Because what happened next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. And it started the moment I picked that junk back up. The trash bag crinkled when I pulled it open. Coffee grounds. Paper napkins. A wilted funeral lily. The brown paper wrapping had absorbed a faint oil stain, but it was intact. I carried it upstairs to my room, closed the door, and placed it on my desk. Up close, the wrapping was heavier than I expected. The twine around it had been tied deliberately, not carelessly. I untied it slowly. The book itself was thick. Burgundy cloth cover. Gold lettering faded at the spine. Dubrovnik International Chess Tournament, 1974. When I opened it, the smell of old paper rose, dry, almost sweet. Grandpa's handwriting filled the margins. Tight, precise annotations. Arrows. Small corrections. Alternate strategies. Halfway through the book, something felt uneven. The back end of the pages lifted slightly higher than the rest. I pressed along the inside binding. There. A hollowed-out compartment, carved carefully into the center of the pages. Inside was a sealed manila envelope. Not crumpled. Not hidden casually. Placed. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. I slid my finger under the flap. Inside were photocopies and one original document. A notarized trust amendment. A property deed transfer. A bank certification stamp. And a letter, short and direct. I read the first line twice. Then a third time. That wasn't junk. Growing up, intelligence in our house was measured by obedience. Not by curiosity. Not by observation. When I was 9, I corrected my mother's math at the grocery store, gently, quietly. She smiled at the cashier and said, "She likes to pretend she understands numbers." I stopped correcting things after that. When I was 14, I built a small budgeting spreadsheet for a school project and suggested a way to refinance a high-interest credit card she'd been complaining about. She told my aunt on the phone later that week. She thinks she's a financial advisor now. Everyone laughed. The third incident wasn't about intelligence. It was about blame. When I was 19, a late mortgage payment triggered a penalty fee. She told relatives it happened because I forgot to transfer rent money on time, even though I had the bank timestamp proving I'd paid early. I didn't fight it. It was easier to absorb it. Grandpa never corrected her publicly. But sometimes when she left the room, he would look at me over his glasses the same way he did during chess games, assessing the board. "You see more than you say," he once told me quietly. I didn't understand then that he was mapping something larger. I understood it the night I opened that envelope. The next morning, I called the number printed on the bank certification. It routed me to the Trust Services Department of a regional bank downtown. I have a document referencing Trust Account 4472B, I said calmly. I need verification of its current status. There was a pause. Can you bring the original documentation in person? The woman asked. I took the bus downtown. The building was sterile and quiet. Frosted glass. Neutral carpeting. The loan officer who greeted me introduced himself and led me into a small conference room. I placed the documents on the table. He read silently for nearly 3 minutes. Then he stood up and closed the door. When he sat back down, his tone had changed. Who else has seen this? No one, I said. He exhaled slowly. Please sit, he added, though I was already seated. He scanned the deed transfer again, tracing the notary seal with his finger. This amendment, he said carefully, references an irrevocable trust executed 6 years ago. He looked at me again. Your grandfather transferred title of the property into this trust at that time. I didn't interrupt. His voice lowered. If the home has been used as collateral since then under someone else's name, we may have a problem. The air in the room felt thinner. Power wasn't loud. It was procedural. He explained it slowly, step by step. 6 years earlier, my grandfather had created an irrevocable trust. Irrevocable meant it could not be altered or revoked without the consent of all named beneficiaries. The property title, our house, had been legally transferred into the trust at that time. That meant ownership no longer sat with my mother personally. She had been listed as a lifetime occupant, not an owner. The amendment inside the chess book was dated 3 years after the original trust formation. It specified that upon his death, full trustee authority and beneficial ownership would transfer to me. Effective immediately. The clause was clear. It also included a no-contest provision. Any attempt to dispute the trust's validity would trigger automatic forfeiture of occupancy rights. The bank officer folded his hands. If your mother represented herself as sole owner when applying for a refinancing loan last year, he said carefully, that would contradict recorded title. He turned his monitor slightly toward me. The county property records showed the trust as titled owner. Not her. If loan documents were signed under a claim of ownership, he continued, that could constitute material misrepresentation. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't need to. Contracts don't argue. They override. When I got home, my mother was at the dining table with a contractor brochure spread open. I'm thinking we finally redo the kitchen, she said without looking up. Once probate clears, we'll have flexibility. Probate. She spoke like ownership was inevitable. I set my bag down. We may need to pause any renovation discussions, I said evenly. She frowned. What does that mean? I met her eyes. You may want to call the bank. She laughed once. For what? I think they'll be reaching out. I didn't elaborate. I went upstairs. And I waited. The call came the next afternoon. I was in my room when I heard her answer. Yes, this is she. A pause. Her tone shifted. I'm sorry, what? Silence stretched between sentences. Her voice tightened. That's not correct. I've owned this property for years. Another pause. Her chair scraped against the floor. What trust? Her footsteps moved down the hallway. She knocked on my door once, sharply. Did you contact the bank? Yes, I said. She stared at me, searching for something, guilt maybe. Panic. They're freezing the equity line, she said quickly. It's a clerical issue. Her hands were trembling. Not violently. Just enough. By evening, a certified letter was delivered. Notice of title clarification. Pending review of loan representations. Occupancy rights subject to trust compliance. Institutional language. Cold. Precise. More powerful than any argument either of us could make. She tried to frame it differently when my aunt called. She misunderstood something. My mother said loudly enough for me to hear. She's being dramatic. Later, she came into my room. You went behind my back, she said quietly. I reviewed a document left to me, I replied. You're trying to take the house. I'm honoring a trust. Her jaw tightened. This is manipulation. I held her gaze. You can't bully a contract. The words weren't sharp. They were factual. She didn't yell. She didn't slam doors. She simply looked smaller. Because paperwork doesn't respond to volume. There was a conversation I remembered then. 3 years ago. We were sitting at the park, watching 2 older men argue over a chessboard bolted into a concrete table. Sometimes, Grandpa had said, moving his bishop deliberately. The strongest piece isn't the one in the center. It's the one positioned quietly before the conflict starts. I'd asked him if he ever regretted not confronting people more directly. He smiled. Direct confrontation only works when both sides respect the same rules, he said. If they don't, you write the rules down. At the time, I thought he was talking about business disputes from his past. Now I understood. He had seen the imbalance in our house. He had watched me shrink to avoid escalation. He hadn't tried to change her. He structured protection instead. The trust wasn't an emotional gesture. It was architectural. Within 2 weeks, the review concluded. The bank required immediate correction of loan documentation. Because the property had been titled under the trust at the time of refinancing, the equity line was deemed improperly secured. The loan was restructured under the trust's authority. Under my authority. My mother's name was removed from title representation. Her occupancy status remained, contingent upon compliance with trust terms. A formal warning was issued regarding material inaccuracies in prior filings. No sirens. No spectacle. Just signatures. Adjustments. Recorded updates at the county clerk's office. Ownership transferred in the only way that matters. On paper, the house feels different now. Not because the walls changed, but because the narrative did. For years, control in our home was verbal. Who said what? Who was believed? Who sounded more certain? Documentation doesn't compete with certainty. It defines it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't expose her publicly. I opened a book. She called it junk. It turned out to be the only thing in that house that was ever truly mine. And the quietest move on the board won the game.